The first time the agent met them, she did not see clients. She saw a problem she thought she understood. The office was one of those sleek, bright real estate spaces in a strip of glass and metal on the edge of the city. Minimal furniture, neutral colors, tastefully framed photos of houses that seemed to glow in sunsets. On the wall, a slogan about finding your forever home. On the desks, stacks of glossy brochures that all looked a little bit the same once you had seen enough of them. Her name was Karen Whitfield. She was in her mid-40s, with the polished calm of someone who had spent years talking people through mortgages and inspections and appraisals. She'd built a reputation as a neighborhood specialist for the quieter, higher-priced side of town. Tree-lined streets, good schools, homeowners associations that liked rules and sameness. She knew every cul-de-sac, every park bench, every rumor about which block might see values soften and which one was about to take off. She also knew, although she would never have said it out loud, what kind of buyers fit the area. The family arrived on a rainy afternoon. A black couple in their mid-30s, with a girl and a boy who looked like they were in early grade school. Their clothes were simple but carefully chosen, not flashy, not careless. The father carried a folder. The mother carried a bag with what looked like snacks, colored pencils, the usual tools for surviving an appointment with small children. They had called ahead and said they wanted to look at houses on the west side of town, in the quiet neighborhoods with the big yards. They liked the schools, they said. They wanted space for their kids to ride bikes safely. On paper, they were just another family moving up. On the other side of the desk, they became something else in Karen's mind. She greeted them with the practiced warmth of someone whose job depended on making strangers comfortable. She asked the usual questions. Budget, bedroom count, commute times. She listened to their answers and nodded in all the right places. On her screen, she pulled up listings in the area they had mentioned, streets she knew well, HOA newsletters she read, neighborhood watch emails she received more often than she liked. What those emails never said directly but always implied was that people in those neighborhoods wanted things to stay a certain way. They talked about keeping the character of the area. They mentioned being careful about who moves in. They complained in coded language about changes they were afraid of. Over time, without ever consciously deciding it, Karen had absorbed those codes. She started doing something she would have called guidance if anyone had asked. When certain buyers came in, people who sounded like the neighbors, looked like the neighbors, had kids in the same clubs as the neighbors, she showed them everything. Every quiet cul-de-sac, every house with a white picket smile. When other buyers came in, people who did not match that pattern, she nudged them toward different zip codes, slightly further out, slightly more diverse, slightly less likely to provoke those emails she hated reading, but had nonetheless learned to anticipate. That afternoon, she felt that familiar impulse. The family's numbers made sense. They were pre-approved. They had a realistic budget for the area. Their wish list was not extravagant, but in her mind, another calculation was already running. How would the neighbors react? What would the HOA president say privately if she saw a sold sign and a black family unloading a moving truck? It was not a calculation she would have admitted to herself in those terms. In her own story, she was careful, responsible, trying to match clients to communities where they would be comfortable. The words were softer than the reality. She began to steer. On the screen, she clicked away from the first-choice neighborhoods and opened a different set of listings. Slightly cheaper areas, closer to busy roads, further from the prestigious elementary school the family had mentioned. She described these places with phrases like up and coming and more of a mix and a little livelier. She left unsaid that she meant livelier in all the ways her usual clients did not want. The father listened, watching her cursor jump across the map. He asked politely about the specific street they had mentioned on the phone. It was in one of the quiet neighborhoods she specialized in, with sidewalks shaded by old oaks and houses that all seemed to have been painted in the same 3 colors. She felt herself hesitate. She could have clicked on that street. She could have pulled up the listing he was asking about. Instead, she explained in a practiced, neutral tone that the market there was very competitive and that she wasn't sure it would be the best fit for them, given the overall lifestyle of the area. The words came easily. She had said variations of them many times before. She suggested they focus on a set of streets just across the main road, where prices were a bit lower and houses a bit smaller. She described them as more realistic and a better match for families like yours. The "like yours" hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. The mother glanced briefly at her husband. It was a quick look, hard to read, a flash of something between them. Frustration, maybe, or the recognition of a pattern they had seen before. The father did not argue. He did not demand that she show them the other neighborhood. He did not pull out printed listings and insist. Instead, he listened, nodded, and allowed her to show them houses in the places she deemed more appropriate. They drove out together in the gray afternoon. She took them to tidy but noisier streets, where traffic carried the constant hum of people going somewhere else. She pointed out playgrounds, mentioned how close they would be to certain shops. She did not mention the long lights at the busy intersection, the train tracks they would have to cross every day, the way property values there crept upward more slowly. The children ran through backyards, laughing. The parents walked room to room quietly, taking everything in, asking a few practical questions. Their faces were controlled, polite. In some houses, there was a flicker of interest. In none of them was there excitement. At the end of the tour, they thanked her. They said they needed time to think. They did not commit to a second viewing. After they left, she wrote a bland note in her CRM system. Showed properties in X and Y neighborhoods, concerned price and fit. Follow up next week. She did follow up. They didn't answer. Their number went to voicemail. Their email reply was short and formal. They had decided to pause their search for the moment, they said. She moved their file into the cold leads category and turned her attention to other clients. Deals came and went. Signs went up and down. Months turned into a year. Then, quietly, something in the city's real estate landscape began to shift. Large investment funds had been sniffing around for a while, looking at clusters of properties rather than individual homes. They wanted to buy not one house, but 10. Not one duplex, but a small portfolio. For agents who could get close to those deals, the commissions were life-changing. Rumors started circulating. A fund was looking to acquire several houses in the very neighborhoods Karen specialized in. There were whispers about bulk purchases, about a long-term strategy to assemble rentals with stable tenants and high credit scores. Agents speculated in group chats and over coffee about who would land the assignment. In meetings, managers nudged their teams to think bigger. Stop chasing only single-family listings, they said. Watch for the whales. It was during one of those weeks, full of rumors and nervy anticipation, that an email landed in the general inbox of the office. It was from a mid-sized investment firm based out of state. The tone was formal. They were exploring a strategic acquisition of residential properties in specific zip codes, starting with a group of homes currently owner-occupied. They were looking for a local brokerage to act as a partner, providing data, introductions, and transaction support. Attached was a short list of target streets. When Karen's manager forwarded the email to the team, her eyes widened. The list was a map of her mental territory. She had sold houses on 3 of the streets. She knew who lived on the others. If anyone in the office was positioned to guide this fund, it was her. Her heart beat faster as she scanned the message. She imagined a year's worth of regular commissions compressed into a few huge checks. She imagined the awards her company handed out for top producers. She saw her name engraved on one of those plaques. The manager scheduled a meeting. The fund wanted to send a representative to discuss a potential partnership. There would be a presentation, questions, a chance to make a pitch. The office buzzed. On the day of the meeting, the conference room was prepared like a stage. Bottled water lined up, folders with printouts, a slide deck open on a big screen, ready to show market charts and tidy graphs. Agents took turns speculating about what the representative would be like. Someone imagined an older man in a very expensive suit. Someone else pictured a young analyst with a laptop full of models. They all agreed on one thing. This was an opportunity they could not afford to mishandle. When the representative walked in, several people in the room reacted with a tiny flicker of surprise they hoped did not show on their faces. He was a black man in his mid-30s, wearing a dark suit with an understated watch, carrying a laptop bag and a folder. Behind him, a colleague, an Asian woman in a gray blazer, wheeled in a small suitcase with files. They greeted the room with polite nods. Karen stared for half a second longer than she should have. Something in his face tugged at a memory. She saw in one flash a rainy afternoon, 2 small children, a quiet couple nodding through a tour they had not asked for. She realized with a small jolt in her chest that she had met him before. The name on his business card confirmed it. The same first name, the same last name as the father in the family she had steered away from her precious neighborhoods. He did not show any sign of recognizing her. If he did not let it surface. The meeting began. He introduced himself as a portfolio manager for a fund focused on long-term residential holdings. He explained, in the calm language of finance, that they were not flippers or short-term speculators. They were looking for stable assets in stable communities. They valued consistent appreciation over quick spikes. The streets on the short list, he said, had come up in their research as particularly strong. Good schools, low turnover, steady demand. He wanted to know who in the room understood not just the numbers, but the unwritten rules of those neighborhoods. Karen felt that phrase like a pinprick. Unwritten rules. She knew them. She had enforced them without ever calling it that. Agents around the table began to pitch their credentials. One talked about years in the business. Another mentioned a long list of past sales. Karen highlighted her specialization in exactly those streets, the mailers she sent, the anniversaries she tracked for homeowners. The representative listened, took notes, asked precise follow-up questions. He wanted to know not only who could find willing sellers, but who understood the social texture of the blocks. Who knew which HOAs were flexible and which were rigid, which neighbors cooperated, which complicated. At one point, he asked how the office approached fair housing issues and steering concerns in tight markets. It was a simple question, delivered in a neutral tone. It hung in the air heavier than any market chart. The manager jumped in with the corporate answer. The firm took fair housing very seriously. There were regular trainings. They never steered clients. The words were clean, reassuring. Karen felt heat creep up the back of her neck. She remembered explaining to that same man months earlier that certain neighborhoods were not the best fit for his family. She remembered gently pushing them toward more suitable streets. She remembered the way his wife had looked at him in the office, that small, silent exchange. Now, in this room, he was no longer the father quietly asking about a specific school. He was the representative of capital big enough to reshuffle half a neighborhood. The meeting ended with promises. He said the fund would review their notes, talk internally, and be in touch about whether and how to move forward. The office floated for the rest of the day on anxious hope. A week later, an email came. The fund thanked them for their time and professionalism. After consideration, they had decided to partner with another local firm that offered a better alignment with our approach to community engagement and compliance. There was a brief sentence about appreciating the data provided. Then the cursor blinked at the bottom of the screen, indifferent to the sinking feeling that spread through the office. No one said the words, "We lost it," out loud at first. They didn't need to. Agents did the math in their heads, calculating commissions that would now go somewhere else. The manager muttered something about competition, about the other firm having connections. The moment passed into the category of disappointments people pretended not to care about. Karen felt something heavier than lost money. She felt, for the first time, an uncomfortable line connecting moments that she had always treated as separate. She read, a few weeks later, about a series of large purchases in the local business section. An unnamed fund had acquired several properties on exactly the street she knew best, working with a different brokerage. There was a short quote from a spokesperson about long-term investment, about belief in the community. Around the same time, conversations began in real estate circles about steering and soft segregation. A local paper ran an article about how black families were still being nudged away from certain areas, not with explicit bans, but with subtle guidance. Fair housing advocates mentioned patterns, not names. Inside the office, someone forwarded a link to a webinar about hidden bias in real estate. It quoted examples that sounded uncomfortably familiar. Agents telling families that certain neighborhoods might not be a fit, suggesting more suitable areas without clear reasons, translating coded neighbor fears into professional advice. Karen clicked on the webinar out of obligation. As she listened, she heard her own phrases repeated by actors in scripted scenarios. Quiet neighborhood, for families like yours, more realistic. In the training, they were not described as careful guidance. They were named as part of a system that kept certain people out of certain zip codes. She thought about the rain that day. She thought about the father's calm face. She thought about the fact that he had not argued. She also thought about the meeting in the conference room, about the way he had asked that question about steering. Whether or not he remembered her specifically, he clearly understood the game better than she had assumed. Later that year, a local fair housing group organized a panel on discrimination in the housing market. Real estate agents, lenders, and advocates were invited to attend. Out of a mixture of curiosity, pressure, and something like guilt, she went. On stage, one of the speakers was introduced as a housing investor and advocate, pushing for more transparency in how brokers treated black buyers. When he stepped up to the microphone, she recognized him again. He spoke calmly about data, about how often families of color reported being told certain areas weren't right for them, about how those patterns didn't always show up in official complaints, but could be seen in who ended up where. He mentioned that he used to be just a father looking for a house, that his perspective had changed after seeing how regularly certain doors were nudged shut. He did not name her. He did not need to. The story, in broad strokes, was common enough that it could have been any agent, any family. Still, she sat in the audience feeling as if a light had been turned on, not on him, but on her. The twist of the story was not simply that a real estate agent had lost the biggest deal of her career to someone she had once quietly pushed aside. The deeper twist was that the same man now held a mirror up to the entire market, forcing it to see that what agents called matching clients and communities often looked from the outside like a polite continuation of old segregation. In the months that followed, the firm she worked for updated its training. They brought in outside experts. They asked agents to document the full range of neighborhoods they showed clients, not just the ones they thought fit. There were murmurs of annoyance, of course. People did not like being told that what they had been doing for years might be part of the problem. For Karen, the changes came with a more personal reckoning. She started, quietly, to handle new clients differently. When families asked about the quiet neighborhoods, she showed them the quiet neighborhoods. When someone mentioned a school, she pulled up every listing in that zone, regardless of what she imagined the HOA might mutter behind closed doors. She could not rewrite the day she steered that family away. She could not chase them down and offer an apology that would feel more like a burden than a gift. But she could, case by case, begin to loosen the grip of those unwritten rules she had spent so long enforcing without question. The man from the fund went on with his work. He continued assembling portfolios, attending panels, speaking in careful, measured sentences about equity and access. In some neighborhoods, the presence of his fund became part of conversations about rising rents, about investors, about who owned what. The story people told about him, when they told it at all, focused on his deals, on the way he forced brokers to confront their habits. The part about a rainy afternoon and a lost starter home did not make the business pages. It lived only in the memories of the people involved. In the end, the market did what it always does. It moved on, reshaping itself around new owners, new rules, new players. But somewhere in that quiet part of town, on those tree-lined streets, there were now families living in houses they might once have been told were not a fit. And somewhere in an office overlooking a parking lot, a real estate agent opened a new client file, pulled up a map, and, for the first time in a long time, did not start by thinking about who the neighbors expected to see.